I always get the same thing, black coffee, no sugar, in the chipped ceramic mug at the back corner of Lark and Finch. There's something about that spot, the way the morning sun slants across the window and lands just on the edge of the counter, that makes waiting for my order feel like a meditation. Except today, my meditation has a new rhythm. He's there before me, leaning against the espresso machine like it's a prop he's grown into. I notice the way his fingers flex around the cup, the slight crease at the corner of his eyes when he smiles at the barista. 50-something, hair more gray than brown, a jacket that doesn't quite match the season, but somehow, he fits. Maybe it's in the pause he gives the world before speaking, or the way he watches someone without needing to say anything. "Morning," he says, almost to himself. Then, like he noticed me, "Your usual?" I nod, and for a second, I can't tell if he's asking about my order or the ritual of being here. When he walks past me to grab a chair, his gaze flickers, not at me exactly, but toward where my hands are tucked under my notebook. I catch the movement, and I pretend to be absorbed in my page. There's a quiet weight in noticing someone notice you, without words. We sit, a few tables apart, but close enough that the space between us hums a little. He hums, not in tune with the music, but like he's trying to fill silence without breaking it. I fold and refold a napkin, just to have something to do with my fingers. My phone sits face down. There's a draft message that I haven't sent in 3 days. I've read it 10 times. I glance up. He's looking out the window, a subtle tilt of his head, eyes tracking nothing in particular. Then, he looks at me. Not a stare, but a soft acknowledgement. He's watching me, and I can feel my chest tighten with a warmth I haven't bothered naming yet. "You, missed the seminar last week," he says. His voice carries that kind of hesitant honesty that makes you want to lean closer just to catch it. "Yeah," I reply. "Traffic." A lie, but I don't correct it. He nods, and the small understanding hangs between us, comfortable and strange all at once. He laughs quietly at something the barista mutters. I laugh too, a little late, a little off, and he glances at me. It's not flirtation, not exactly, but it makes the world feel slightly rearranged, like I've been standing in the wrong light all along, and he's just shown me the corner that fits. When he finally stands to leave, he hesitates by the door. He looks at me and shrugs, as if weighing whether to say something else. I swallow, and the half-smile I didn't know I had creeps onto my face. Then my phone buzzes. A text I didn't expect. "Can you meet me for a walk? I found something you might like." I stare at it, heart quiet and loud at the same time. Right now, it feels like everything I've been pausing for, everything unsent and unspoken, might finally have a rhythm that fits. I stand. And he's already waiting that we walked along the riverbank, leaves rustling underfoot. The sky had that gray-gold light, the kind that makes the city quiet enough for your thoughts to seem loud. I kept my hands in my coat pockets, but I could feel his presence beside me, not close, not distant, just aligned in a strange rhythm that neither of us named. "You always come here?" he asked, tossing a small pebble into the water. "Yeah," I said. "Helps me think. Or not think." I laughed, but it was thin, like a sigh folded in sound. He nodded slowly, like he understood more than the words carried. "I used to walk with my daughter here," he said, after a pause. His voice was careful, almost afraid. "Before she moved out." "Before," he trailed off, letting the space hold the rest. I didn't press. I didn't need to. There's something in leaving a story half told, letting it hang in the air between two people. I sensed a quiet ache there, something mirrored in the corners of my own chest, the unsent texts, the long pauses, the rehearsed greetings that never land quite right. For a while, we just walked. I noticed the way his shoulders carried the weight of decades, the way his hands brushed against mine when he adjusted the scarf around his neck. I wanted to tell him that he could be here, now, fully, but I didn't. "You never asked why I'm single," he said, almost like an afterthought, handing me a cup of tea from a thermos he had brought. I wrapped my fingers around it. Warm. Solid. Familiar. I figured it wasn't my business, I said, but my throat tightened. Divorced, he admitted. 10 years ago. Thought I'd be fine, thought I'd move on. Turns out, some things linger longer than you think. And there it was. The tiny, forbidden heartbeat in the room, or rather, the sidewalk. I imagined us tangled in possibilities that shouldn't exist. His age, the distance, the invisible lines we weren't supposed to cross. My chest tightened at the thought, and I realized I'd been holding it back all morning, the weight of wanting someone who might never be mine in the way I wanted. We stopped by a bench, the one tucked under a willow. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, watching the water ripple. I mirrored him, careful not to seem like I was leaning closer, but my knee brushed his, and I felt it. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, I said softly, almost to myself. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. He looked up, and for the first time, there was a pause that held more than words could. He tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Then his hand lifted, brushing the stray hair from my cheek. Gentle. Intentional. A gesture that said more than anything either of us could speak. I shivered. Not from the wind, the next few days were quiet, but the quiet felt heavier. I kept finding excuses to linger at the coffee shop, to take the long route past the riverbank, to see him without saying I needed to. But each time I saw him, he seemed distant. Not cold, not angry, just careful, like he was measuring the space between us and deciding it was too close. Wednesday morning, he arrived with a folded newspaper and the same old thermos. I smiled before I could stop myself. He nodded, barely, eyes flicking toward mine, then back down at the headline. I watched his fingers fold and unfold the paper. A tick, a habit. I wanted to reach out and stop the motion, just for a second. You're quiet today, he said. Almost teasing. But his voice lacked its usual warmth. I'm tired, I said. Truth, of sorts. But there was something I didn't say, something that hung in the space between my words and the steam rising from my cup. He sipped his tea slowly, eyes on the window, like he was somewhere else. I imagined him at home, alone, thinking the same thoughts about me that I couldn't say aloud. And then guilt, sharp and sudden, because what if I was reading too much into it? Later, I caught him at the library, pulling a book from the shelf just as I rounded the corner. I froze. He noticed, and for a beat, our hands touched. Accidentally. Maybe not. I didn't move my hand. Neither did he. The contact lingered long enough for something to thread itself between us, an acknowledgement, a question, a temptation. Did you need this? He asked, gesturing toward the book. I shook my head, words tangled somewhere between nervousness and hope. No. I just thought I'd look at it. He smiled faintly. A half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. And then the small interruption, a friend from the cafe appeared, waving, pulling him back to ordinary life. He straightened instantly, the moment gone, and I felt it, the thud of something unresolved. We ended up on the bench later, sun dropping low. I watched the shadow of his profile, the way his jaw clenched when he spoke to someone else on the phone. And I realized how close I wanted to be. How close I shouldn't be. Sometimes, I said quietly, I think about, and my voice faltered. I couldn't finish. Not yet. He tilted his head, and his hand hovered near mine on the bench. Our fingers almost touched, brushing only by chance, but the brush held weight. Neither moved away. Neither moved closer. I swallowed. The air was thick with something unspoken, fragile, risky. And then he leaned slightly, just enough. Close enough that I felt his breath, warm against my cheek. My heart jumped. His eyes flicked down at my lips for a second too long. But he stopped. Pulled back. And the space between us yawned, carrying everything we hadn't said. The park was nearly empty, the light soft and dappled through early autumn leaves. I'd come to clear my head, but he was there already, leaning against the same old railing we'd paused by weeks ago. He didn't see me at first, and I had the strange urge to stay hidden, to watch him without disturbing whatever rhythm he carried. When he finally noticed me, his smile faltered, like he'd just realized I'd been holding something back all along. "I didn't think you'd come today," he said, voice low. "I had to," I murmured, my fingers fidgeting with the edge of my sleeve. We walked in silence. The kind that feels heavy, dense with everything neither of us says. And then I noticed him glance at a young couple passing by. Something tightened in my chest. A flash of jealousy, sudden and uninvited. I scolded myself for it immediately, but the feeling lingered. "I sometimes wonder if I'm making a mistake," he said, almost under his breath, more to himself than me. "Or if he stopped, shaking his head, a half-laugh at his own hesitation. "Or if you what?" I asked softly, barely willing to let the words out. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned on the railing, looking at the river below, hands gripping the cold metal. His jaw was tight. I could see him wrestling with something he wasn't ready to speak aloud. I stepped closer. Not too close, not wanting to push, just close enough that he'd feel the shift. "You don't have to say it," I whispered, though my chest was pounding. He glanced at me then, eyes dark and hesitant, and for a moment, I saw it, the fear of losing control, the guilt threading through his expression. I shouldn't want this," he admitted, voice cracking slightly. I shouldn't." The words landed between us like a delicate weight. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to close that distance, to let him see that wanting wasn't wrong. But my hands stayed at my sides, trembling. "I do," I said finally, the confession spilling before I could stop it. "I want this. I want you. Even if it's wrong." He swallowed. His gaze flicked to my lips for a second, just a second, and I felt the quiet pull between us, the almost there moment hovering on the edge of irreversibility. Then he shook his head and looked away, body tense. "Maybe we shouldn't," he murmured, but his hand twitched, just slightly, as if trying to reach without permission. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. The river gurgled softly. Leaves drifted in the wind. Everything was ordinary, and yet charged with something we couldn't name. And then he asked, quietly, almost to himself, "Do you ever wonder, what happens if we stop pretending this is impossible?" The words hung there. Between us. Heavy. Waiting, the next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop, expecting to see him tucked into his usual corner with his thermos and newspaper. But the seat was empty. The newspaper wasn't even on the table. A small ache tickled in my chest, not heartbreak, exactly, more like the weight of a pause. I waited anyway, stirring my coffee slowly, noticing how quiet the shop seemed without him. I checked my phone, half expecting a text, a note, anything. Nothing. By mid-morning, I'd convinced myself he was just late. Maybe distracted. Then the emails at work kept piling up, the phone kept buzzing, and still, no word. When I finally saw him, a few days later, he was distant. The careful warmth had retreated, replaced by measured nods and brief glances. He smiled politely, but the crease at the corner of his eyes, the one that had made me feel like I'd been noticed, really seen, was gone. "Hey," I said, voice too light, hoping it would reach him. "Hi," he replied, almost clipped. And that was it. No thermos, no bench, no walk along the riverbank. I started to notice the small ways he'd changed, leaving a door slightly ajar instead of holding it for me, taking a different route on his way to the library, a laugh that didn't reach me anymore. Each gesture was a soft subtraction from what had been, and my chest felt hollow in the gaps. I imagined 100 scenarios. Maybe he'd remembered something, an ex, a child, a life complication I hadn't known about. Maybe I'd misread everything. Maybe the bridge we'd built between us was only a shadow of connection, one I'd mistaken for something solid. I wrote messages I never sent. Did I do something wrong? "Are you okay? Do you want me to go away?" Each draft lingered unsent, saved as a quiet ritual of hope and restraint. Some afternoons, I'd catch him from across the street, carrying groceries or checking his watch. Sometimes he'd glance at me, just a flicker, but then he'd keep walking. Each glance was both a spark and a reminder of the distance he now held. And yet, I couldn't stop checking the bench. The one under the willow. Empty. Just as empty as the space between us. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I left a cup of coffee there once, untouched, my hands lingering on the ceramic like leaving a piece of myself behind. When I walked away, I didn't look back. The cup stayed, waiting for someone who might never return. And maybe that was the cruelest part, the waiting, the small flickers of connection, the quiet ache that didn't resolve, like the world had pressed pause and forgotten to hit play again. The rain had started again, soft at first, tapping the roof like a metronome. I stood on his doorstep, coat damp, hands stuffed in my pockets, rehearsing everything I could say, and all the things I couldn't. He opened the door, just enough to let the light spill into the hallway, and paused. "Hey," he said. Voice quiet, steady, but carrying a weight I'd felt for weeks. "Hi," I said. My throat tightened, but I pushed the words out anyway. "Can I come in?" He nodded, stepping aside. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old books, familiar in a way that made my chest ache. I kicked off my shoes, careful to avoid puddles, and followed him to the kitchen. The kettle was already on, a ritual we'd started months ago, though neither of us had named it. We stood there, silent, listening to the soft whistle of the water. I wanted to reach for him, to close the space I'd spent weeks imagining, but the hesitation held me back. He started, cutting himself off, hands tightening around the mug he'd poured. "I wasn't sure if you'd come back." "I wasn't sure I would," I admitted. But I couldn't stay away either. My voice was smaller than I expected, but he caught it anyway. The air between us vibrated with all the unsaid things, the longing, the fear, the guilt for wanting something complicated, and yet undeniably ours. My chest felt heavy with it, and I realized that this moment, the choice to speak, the choice to risk being seen, was heavier than any risk outside these walls. He tilted his head, eyes searching mine, and finally let his words land. "I don't know if I can promise anything long-term. I don't even know if I should. But right now," he paused, taking a deep breath, "I want this. Right now." I didn't need more. I nodded, and a small laugh escaped me, shaky, like the first exhale after holding your breath too long. We moved closer, slowly, carefully. Hands hovered near each other, brushing occasionally, like testing the water. No dramatic gestures, no declarations of forever. Just presence. Just acknowledgement. "I'm scared," he admitted, voice soft. "I've spent so long trying not to feel like this." "I know," I said. "Me too." And then, nothing more needed to be said. I rested my hand lightly on his forearm. He gave a small, almost imperceptible squeeze in return. The kettle hissed. Rain continued tapping. Time felt suspended. "Okay," he whispered, and the word carried more weight than any grand confession could. "Okay," I echoed, letting the tension slip away into the quiet comfort of shared space. No promises. No guarantees. Just the warmth of being seen. Right now, the sun rose slowly over the city, spilling light across streets that smelled faintly of wet pavement and early autumn leaves. At 8:47 a.m., I found myself back at Lark and Finch, black coffee in my usual chipped mug, notebook open but largely empty. The warmth seeped into my hands, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for anything to happen. He arrived a few minutes later, carrying his thermos and a folded newspaper. No grand entrance, no dramatic gesture, just the same careful, steady presence I'd grown used to. He slid into the seat across from me, eyes flicking briefly to mine before returning to the steam rising from his cup. We didn't speak much, but the silence felt different now, lighter, shared, unburdened. A few quiet words about the weather, the train schedule, the book he'd finished last night. I folded and refolded a napkin, just as I always did, and he noticed, giving a small, almost imperceptible smile. Later, we walked to the riverbank, our steps slow, matching. The bench under the willow waited for us, familiar as an old habit. We sat, not pressed close, just close enough. I watched the way his hand brushed mine once, twice, and how his gaze lingered on the ripples of water, the reflection of light, the small rhythm of the day. No declarations, no promises beyond the present, just the acknowledgement that here, now, we belonged. Tea in a thermos. Black coffee. Footsteps through dry leaves. Little routines that had become ours, each carrying a quiet intimacy that no one else could touch. Months had passed, and yet, nothing about this felt rushed or forced. Life had shifted subtly, and we had shifted with it, learning to trust, to see, to stay. Sometimes, he hummed softly while reading, and I would watch him without saying anything. Sometimes, I wrote a note and left it by his mug, and he would notice with a slight tilt of his head, eyes crinkling. We had learned the language of small gestures, and it said everything we didn't need words for. One morning, I traced a small circle on the condensation of his thermos, and he caught my gaze with a gentle look that made my chest tighten just enough to remind me we were here, fully present, no longer suspended in pause or fear. When we finally stood to leave, our steps aligned without needing to speak. The bench behind us, the coffee cups on the table, the quiet river, it all held a memory of how far we had come, a quiet testament to patience and attention, to holding space for each other without demanding more than the moment allowed. I leaned into the ordinary rhythm, feeling the weight of something settled, unspoken but understood. Only we would know, the way 8:47 a.m. tastes like safety, like warmth, like being seen. And for the first time, I didn't need more. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?